Hello, and welcome for Solving from Anywhere, MIT Solve Speaker Series. I am Hala, Solve's Managing Director for Community. We are thrilled to host incredible speakers today on the topic of supporting innovation to solve world challenges. For those of you who may be new to Solve, welcome. Solve is an initiative of MIT, and our mission is to drive innovation to solve world challenges. We find, fund, and support social entrepreneurs that we call solver teams, and we connect them with a community of members who can support them to scale their impact. And we very much hope you enjoy your introduction to Solve's community of entrepreneurs and social impact leaders. To our members and solver teams, welcome back. It is so lovely to see your familiar names and faces on Zoom. In fact, Solve is lucky to count so many incredible foundations, corporations, nonprofits as member. This community has grown to over 120 member organizations who achieve their social impact goals through partnership with Solve and Solver teams. If you are a member, don't forget to register for virtual Solve Challenge Finals on September 29. This is our annual pitch event and truly my favorite part of the year. You'll hear from the finalists of the 2020 Global Challenges. And let me tell you, we received over 2,600 solutions this year from 135 countries. I do not envy those judges who have to pick the finalists. It'd be 75 of them, and they're eligible for more than $2 million in prize funding. So the stakes are real, and I can't wait to meet those that will make it out and become our next Solver class. Solve Challenge Finals is open to the Solve community of members and Solver teams. If you are interested in attending the event as a Solve member, we would love to hear from you. Okay, we are talking about innovation for solving global challenges today. And we know that if we want to achieve the social development, the sustainable development goals, there's not just a financing gap that's big, but there's also an innovation gap. How do we solve things that we haven't solved before? How do we solve them in a cheaper way? How do we get them out to more people? I hope we're going to get some answers today from two perspectives, especially in the post-COVID world. One is innovating as a social entrepreneur with one of our Solver teams. And then two are big philanthropies, one of the oldest, Rockefeller Foundation, and one of the largest, Mastercard Foundation. Let me tell you what to expect in the next hour that we'll spend together. So as a starter, I want to introduce you to one of our Solver teams, Blue Sky Analytics. Then we'll have 30-minute conversation with Sarah Geisenheimer, who's Managing Director for Innovation at the Rockefeller Foundation, and Payal Dalal, who's Vice President for Global Programs at Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. Finally, we'll close the hour with an audience question and answer. So you can join the conversation by using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window. As you think of a question, you can input it there at any time. We'll be reading your questions. You can upvote your favorite question, and you can post your question on Twitter using hashtag #SolvingFromAnywhere. So plenty of reasons to participate, and we want to hear from you. All right, let's get started with Abhilasha Purwar, the founder and CEO of Blue Sky Analytics. Abhilasha is a solver from our 2019 Health Challenge, Healthy Cities. Thank you for joining us, Abhilasha, all the way from Gurgaon, India. I know it's getting late where you are. Tell us what you do. Tell us about Blue Sky Analytics.
Hi, thanks so much, Hala. Wonderful introduction, and thanks for having me here. I love what you started with saying, that we are doing and we are solving problems that have never been solved before. And I just recently read this beautiful quote that we're building a world that has never been built before. And that's what we're doing at Blue Sky. We are building one of the world's largest, that's our vision and ambition. And hopefully with the help of Solve and with the help of other stakeholders and partners, we'll be successful in that. So we want to build the world's largest global environmental data stack. Information about air, water, land, soil quality, water quality available, democratized, easily accessible to people, customers, governments, laymen across the world so that we can all make better environmental and more climate positive decisions.
I love it. You heard it here first, the largest data for environment. And I know that a big part, I mean, Abhilasha, first of all, it's incredible to see how much you've scaled in the past year since we've gotten to know you. And I know that partnership is a big part of how you do this. Tell us more about the partnerships that you've built both through Solve and otherwise. I know you have quite a few announcements that have come up lately.
Yeah. So definitely, everything is about people. Like, yes, capital is a very important part of the picture, and Solve enabled us with the very first, like, sort of funding and like a check size, which was enough to get us like, moving ahead. But at the end of the day, it comes on human capital, it comes on partnerships. So essentially what we do is we take a lot of data sets, either from satellites or from raw data sets from the ground, from sensors, from governments and internet. And we do a lot of machine learning algorithms to get sense out of them and make like environmental sense out of them. And in the past 1 year, we have built strong partnerships with European Space Agency. We won a social entrepreneurship challenge in December. We recently announced our membership with the Climate Trace Coalition started by ex-US Vice President Al Gore, who's like my favorite hero, who's like almost kicked me onto this environmental journey. And we recently raised our seed funding round with very aligned investors. So it was not just capital, but it was people who were really aligned to the vision and the statement and the problems that we wanted to solve. And they wanted us to give that kind of like, support and bandwidth to actually go and run for the moon.
That's terrific. Thank you. Wow, this is so inspiring. So maybe tell us a little bit about how you are adapting to the current situation. I mean, there is a sense that with everything that's going on, the climate crisis and all its associated risks have kind of receded to the wayside. There's even been reports of cleaner air and improved environmental health since the pandemic started and we're all in lockdowns and we can't fly and all of that. Is that what you're seeing? Is that a silver lining for you or for the environment, or is there something else going on?
So there are a few positives here and there, but like I think when it comes to climate change and climate action, we are a long way far from where we should be. But yeah, like 2 years ago when I started Blue Sky, I had a very simple thesis and I actually wanted to do a PhD in economics, and it was climate change induced financial crisis. And I was envisioning that to happen in 2030s, but here we are in 2020s with a COVID-induced financial crisis. And one of the things that I was always confounded was like, why is the financial sector, regular economies, regular businesses, not talking about climate risk, not talking about, whenever we talk about environmental actions, it's like, oh, but economics, but it's more expensive, but you're not looking at the risk. And last year, Mark Carney, who is the Bank of England's governor, he's like, climate change could be a $20 trillion risk to the global economies. And that's where we got started. Obviously, we didn't get that kind of traction or attention or people listening to us in the beginning, but with COVID, I think it has really shaken up the people, and people are like, okay, if this health crisis could lead to these kinds of destabilizations across global economies, then what would happen with climate change? And that's gotten into a little more conscience globally. However, when it comes to like impact and change, we're only last year we produced about 36 billion tons of carbon, and this year we will produce like 32. So it's not really that much. Even when you stopped all economic activity, all the flying and literally going to offices everywhere across the world, we are still producing a lot of carbon emissions, which kind of gives you this insight that we're locked into a system which was meant for the past. And we need to break those shackles. We need to think really innovative and kind of, people call it crazy, but you have to think out of the box to create systems that would allow you to live a little low carbon economy. Obviously, in terms of environment and air pollution, it's been great. In Delhi, I'm living with one of the best air qualities that I have seen in my lifetime in Delhi, but it's short-lived, it's short-term because we are locked in solutions and systems which are unenvironmental fundamentally. And I think that's where Solve, other members from Rockefeller Foundation, Mastercard, and everyone who's watching, every consumer, every member of capital market, every participant of society can really come forward. And it's like, this is not how we want to live forward. And we're going to live a more climate positive life.
Well, that's That's a very strong call to action for those of us who
Yeah.
are clear than this. And by the way, Abhilasha, I see a red thread in your career. You're just going after crises, economic, environmental. You're after it. So that's very encouraging. For everyone, do not forget to submit your questions for Abhilasha using the question and answer function. She'll be coming with you joining us for the last section of this conversation, and you should stay tuned to hear her answers at the end of the session.
Thanks so much, Hala.
Thank you. All right, I'm so excited for who's joining us next. Sarah Geisenheimer, the Managing Director for Innovation at the Rockefeller Foundation, and foundation that's been around for more than 100 years, and that's dedicated to ensuring that all people have the right to health, food, power, and economic mobility. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you. So wonderful to be here.
Wonderful to have you. And Payal Dalal is the Vice President for Global Programs at the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth, which empowers a community of thinkers, leaders, and doers on the front lines of inclusive growth. Payal oversees the Center's philanthropic investments around the globe, and I'm excited to hear more about that. Hi, Payal.
Hi, Hala. Great to be here. Thanks for hosting me.
Thank you. Well, let's jump right into it and right into the moment where we are, the worst pandemic in centuries, on top of intertwined, entrenched inequalities, including along racial lines here in the US. This has exponentially exacerbated the impact of a health crisis. We're in not a great spot, let's say it this way, and we're adjusting every 5 minutes to a new normal. I can barely keep up. And I'm wondering how big organizations like yours are adapting. How do you see the role of philanthropy in this moment in history? And maybe Sarah, starting with you, how's the Rockefeller Foundation responding to the moment?
Sure, thank you. I couldn't have said it better myself. The health crisis and the pandemic is awful, but it's really laying bare systemic inequities that have been in our society, including in the US, for such a long time. And so the foundation is responding in a few ways. We're committing $100 million to address the crisis caused by COVID, the health crisis, but also those inequities. So first, we're focused on a national testing and tracing action plan. We're calling for 30 million tests by October, but not just tests, faster tests. So we're at about 4.5 million now, but they're taking up to 2 weeks, which essentially makes the test useless because we need those results immediately to get our economy back open. We think we need 25 million tests for essential workers and for schools, and to reach minority communities who probably don't have access. Private companies are able to test their people, but it's really the minority communities who are having the hardest time here. We know that minorities are more than twice as likely to be infected, low-income neighborhoods are more than twice as likely to be infected than high-income neighborhoods. We also need contact tracing. We're calling for a $75 billion commitment from the government. In addition to addressing the pandemic itself, we're also looking at food and other areas of health, including mental health and economics. So in food, we're proud to be partnered with the Urban School Food Alliance, and we've created an emergency access fund, particularly for Dallas. Our funding will support Dallas, where there are 135,000 students, 85% of whom are in need. We recently partnered with Google to create an app called the Health Heroes. This app is incredible. It's working to support our healthcare providers who are on the front lines, who are experiencing, in some cases, extreme mental distress because they're seeing more deaths than they've seen before. They don't have PPE, they're working long hours. And this app will help them to track their own mental health. And if there are certain indicators, they'll be connected to low-cost mental health. Those are just a few examples of how we're responding.
Thank you for this, Sarah. And Payal, what about Mastercard? I know your role is global and you're seeing the impact on the ground across the world. Tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I'll start with just a little bit of context, Hala, because I'm not sure a lot of people know what the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth is. So we are part of the company of Mastercard, and we're essentially the philanthropic hub of Mastercard, the company. We have philanthropic assets, but we also really try to leverage the assets of the company. So when I talk about what we're doing for COVID, I'll take two lenses, right? I'll talk about what the company is doing and then how philanthropy, my group is really trying to complement. What I would say is that, building on Sarah's point, I think the pandemic has really just highlighted and exacerbated a lot of the inequalities that have been in our society across communities and countries around the world. I think disproportionately those who are in low income situations, those from minority backgrounds, those who have less access to education are just being disproportionately impacted. And so while it's incredibly, the scale of the pandemic is so large, I think it also gives us opportunity. I mean, what we're really focused on at the center is how do we make sure that it's not just growth, but it's inclusive growth. And so in terms of COVID and what we have been doing, on the philanthropic side, we decided to really put effort into COVID relief granting, which is something relatively new for the center. We've been very focused on our 4 thematic areas, but there was just so much immediate need. And so we've been doing COVID relief grants across the world. We've also started thinking about recovery and how we can really support recovery. And where we are really focusing on, and where I would say the commercial side of the house is really focusing on, is on small business. We know that small business not only is this backbone of local economies, but they have really been hit hard by the pandemic. And so how can we support small business when it comes to the things they need, like capital? How can we support small businesses with the things they need, like tools and services? But more importantly, how do we help them adjust to the new normal, which is all about taking advantage of the digital economy? And how do we help them navigate things like e-commerce and understanding how you pivot from in-person customer relations to online? And so we're doing a number of things that I'm happy to get into, but I'm conscious that, we want to have more of a discussion.
Thank you for this. And it is, for both of your organizations, this multi-pronged approach that is looking at both health crisis and recovery and inclusive recovery. And it sounds, we were having a conversation with Mary Barra, the CEO and chairman of General Motors, and she was telling us about how a huge, behemoth of an organization that's also been around for so many years started building these ventilators, and at such a speed that they now have a term internally of ventilator speed of doing business, and it's allowing them to be much more steadfast on their feet. And I'm wondering, what does ventilator fast look like for your organization? Are there new tools that you're using beyond the programmatic? Sarah, maybe we start with you.
Sure, I love that ventilator speed. I don't know if it's ventilator speed, but maybe ventilator innovation for us. So our team is focused on applying data science to the challenges that we faced in this world. Some are new and some are old. And we're doing that in a few ways through partnerships. So for example, we've partnered with the Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. I'm really proud of that. And Payal, I'm sure, can talk about this a bit as well, but for a challenge for inclusive growth and recovery and how we can apply data science to issues like getting workers into jobs and creating inclusive and resilient cities and access to capital. That challenge just closed. We had 1,200 applicants, which was absolutely incredible. Another partnership that we have through data.org is Benefits Data Trust. So there's a system in this country that is completely antiquated in terms of accessing benefits like unemployment insurance and SNAP, and you can imagine that now in this pandemic, those benefits are even more need with half of people that were in jobs having lost jobs. So Benefits Data Trust with our funding is helping to apply data and technology with strong customer service outreach to help people access and enroll in those benefits and navigate what is a totally antiquated system. And they're on track for enrolling 400,000 people. I think they're close to 70,000 this year. They're also working on policy change. So for example, in North Carolina, they were able to get 280,000 people enrolled and continually enrolled in SNAP so that every year, at every interval, they're not having to continue to navigate this extremely challenging and paper-based system.
Thank you for this. And Payal, tell us more about this Rockefeller and Mastercard initiative that you're partnering around, the data science for social impact.
Yeah, so data.org is really to try to help bridge the capacity gap between what the private sector is able to do when it comes to data science and what civil society and the public sector is able to do. And, you know, I think this goes to a broader point that COVID has really changed and evolved the dynamic in social impact, especially between funders and donors and grantees, and that funders need to think differently about the dynamic. You know, I think historically it tends to be quite transactional, but now, especially in COVID, and given the fact that social impact is really in crisis globally, I think it's less about writing a check, which is incredibly important, but it's actually about dialing up flexibility. And it's also thinking about capacity from an organizational perspective. And I think data.org is a great example where it's more than just writing a check. It's about how do we build organizational capacity at an NGO level, whether it's improving data science and analytics, or whether it's helping an NGO or a partner with digitization. I mean, I think one of the things that I'm seeing across my grant portfolio is that different grantees have different levels of resiliency, and part of it's based on the program model, but part of it's based on whether that grantee is really adept and has embraced technology, and, you know, helping them and supporting them and making that pivot is incredibly important. And so, you know, what I would say to any of the donors here on the webinar is to really take some time to think about what assets you have that you might be able to share with your partners. A good concrete example is one of my grantees came to me and said, can we talk to your HR people about how they're thinking about travel policy? We don't know what to tell our staff. And so my HR people talked to our grantee to say, here's how we're thinking and managing risks associated with COVID and how we're thinking about staff welfare. And it helps the grantee accelerate their timeline as they're thinking about what to do with travel policy given COVID.
That's so insightful. So, and it's a very great, you know, call to action for donors around dialing up their flexibility. And I'm wondering, Payal, if this speaks to an even bigger picture of, yes, you know, it's philanthropy adapting to that moment and kind of reimagining the funder-grantee relationship. Is there something to be said about a change in the role of philanthropy in society at this moment?
I think so. You know, I always think philanthropy in a lot of ways is tip of spear, but I think the scale of the pandemic has really mobilized everyone. And so I think part of the role that I see for my group within Mastercard is to help the company think a little bit differently, to think a little bit more creatively, to think a little bit more outside of the box. A really good example, Hala, is that, you know, traditionally when, you know, people think about partnerships, they're thinking about, okay, how does a philanthropist partner with an NGO, or how does the private sector partner with the public sector? And what we're really trying to do, given the fact there's so much urgency around COVID and the economic implications of COVID, is actually to say, actually, there are all these companies that are trying to get involved in this. There's a role for us to play in coordinating and creating something that's collective and holistic, because I think, especially in the corporate philanthropy world, you know, we've all been fairly fragmented. We talk a good game about partnership, but we don't really get to the nitty-gritty of partnerships. And so I think there's a real opportunity here to figure out how companies partner with each other and how we make sure that it's not just philanthropic funding, that it's partnership with your core assets, your core skills, your core tools and services. So how can you create for a small business when all of us want to help? How do we all bring the tools and services so that it's in one place that a small business can navigate everything they need, as opposed to a small business having to go to lots of different initiatives to get what they need?
Right. So it's and I know you, maybe we dive right into it even deeper. And I know you have a lot of stories of partnerships that you've helped advance and that were maybe some that we hear less about in the social impact sector, which are between two private entities. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, so it's a model we like to call private-private partnerships. And so it's about how do two socially minded companies get together, or three or four, and actually think about how they can work together and collaborate to really catalyze and maximize impact. A good example of this, Hala, is what we're doing in Kenya for micro businesses in supply chains. So Unilever has this challenge where they have a lot of micro and small retailers in their supply chain who can't get access to credit because they're deemed too risky. A lot of local banks have the challenge that they want to be able to lend, but they just don't feel comfortable lending to these micro and small businesses because they don't have enough data. And from my perspective, one of the major bottlenecks to growth when it comes to micro and small businesses is very much access to finance, access to capital. And so ourselves, Unilever, Mastercard Commercial, and Kenyan Commercial Bank got together to say there must be a way that we can collaborate to unlock finance. And what we ended up doing was using the transaction and purchasing history of the micro and small businesses in Unilever supply chain to try to de-risk the micro and small businesses. And so it gave Kenyan Commercial Bank enough context to say, okay, they have been purchasing and at X amount of rate over X number of months. This gives me more information. And so what we piloted was a microcredit program that gave interest-free microcredit for 17 days to the micro and small business. It went across Mastercard rails, and the micro and small businesses started to practice using credit and repaying credit. And what it did was it started to build a digital credit history for these micro and small businesses, which made them eligible for bigger and bigger loans to help them with cash flow issues, to help them with working capital. And from the center perspective, what we did was to make sure that the micro and small businesses had the capability and the skills that they need. If this is the first time they were accessing credit, how do we make sure they understand what credit is? How do we make sure they're thinking about credit management, financial management? But then also, now that there's new cash flow, how do you use it to maximize your inventory? And so starting to orient towards business growth. And it was a win for Mastercard Commercial because the credit went on Mastercard rails. It was a win for Unilever because it meant that the micro and small businesses in their supply chain were buying more Unilever products. And it was a win for Kenyan Commercial Bank because all of a sudden they had a new pipeline of clients that were deemed less risky because they had more information. And it's a win from my perspective, from a social impact perspective, because we found a new way to unlock access to capital.
Well, that's a great example of a double bottom line and of, you brought the actor, you de-risked by bringing the actors together, by collating data from multiple instances, and then from upskilling everyone, which I thought was really interesting. So it's also about the capacity building that comes with those partnerships. And maybe we stay on that topic of risk, because I think you just gave us a really great example, Payal, of philanthropy as the incubator of ideas for society in some sense. There are multiple risks that can be taken by philanthropy that maybe governments or financial markets are less able to take. I think probably the most interesting risk taking for philanthropies is the time scale risk, because you're not beholden to stock market analysts or voting timetables. Sarah, I would love to hear from your perspective, how do you take risk in your work in order to de-risk for the rest of society in some way?
Sure, thank you. And I love that example. That was so compelling. And the foundation is thinking about its capital as risk capital. We've always thought about our capital that way because of, as you say, Hala, the time risk that we're able to take. Of course, we use our traditional grant making, from funder to grantee, and also try to build capacity and develop partnerships. But we're also looking at how we can deploy the right kind of capital to the need. And I'll give you a couple examples. A few years ago, we made a loan of $2 million to an organization called Cloud Factory. Cloud Factory is a remote work organization that their 5,000 plus employees label machine learning data from places that you may or may not expect, Kenya and Nepal, for example. And they were growing their business and they needed funding. Instead of making a grant, we made a loan of $2 million that enabled them to increase their workforce in Kenya 10 times, to expand to different locations, to put millions of dollars into the pockets of their workforce. And that loan was so instrumental in their business growth that they were able to attract $80 million in investment to grow even further, hiring many more thousands of people. And they were able to pay back their loan 2.5 years before they were expected to. So to me, that's just an amazing story of using capital. More recently, our team was proud to help, in some ways, found an organization called Atlas AI. So Atlas AI is a group that was out of Stanford, 3 academics. And they have this amazing technology that pairs satellite imagery with AI technology to provide insights for things on the ground like economic activity and agriculture. And that has obvious commercial and social benefits. And as we were talking to the team, we were trying to decide, how best is this business going to scale? There's a gap in the market. They had this amazing tool, but it really wasn't doing what it could ultimately do. And we collectively came to the decision that founding a corporation, a B corporation, would be the most impactful way to move forward. So we founded them with a Series A and then a seed round of $4 million from the foundation. And they were able to attract recently an additional $5 million investment in their Series A.
Thank you so much. These are great examples of financial risk, of outcome risk, and of building those partnerships. I know in your role, Sarah, you're kind of, you're tasked with keeping philanthropy fresh. How do you spot a winning idea, and how do you nurture it from where you sit at Rockefeller Foundation?
Oh, such a great question. I think you spot a winning idea from experience. I think understanding who the team is, what the opportunity is, what the white space is, whether there's dynamism, is probably the best way that we can think about keeping philanthropy fresh. I wish I had a better answer for you. This is something that I was at the foundation for almost 9 years before leaving and then recently returning. This is a question that I've asked myself over my almost 10 years at the foundation. And I feel, again, that it just comes from experience and having good conversations. One of the things that's really challenging in philanthropy is the power dynamic. So the people that sit on this side of the table, like myself, hold a fair amount of power, and that's clearly, in my opinion, inappropriate. And so I think it's asking the right questions, making sure that as much as you can, you're giving power to the person or the people on the other side of the table, understanding what their vision is, how your dollars are going to be used. There could be conversations, for example, where a foundation may want to go in a certain direction and a grantee very much wants the funding and so will agree to go in that direction, even if it's the wrong direction. So I think listening is really important to give that power to the grantee. And I think they have the winning ideas, and our job is to help support those.
Well, that's beautiful. And I do think conversations about power, dynamics, and listening are really top of mind today. And even before this pandemic and all the inequalities that it kind of exacerbated and really brought to surface, there has been demands for philanthropy to do more, maybe some outcry that philanthropy has helped remove the edges of capitalism and smooth them over in some way, without really being able to address the root causes of this inequality in a way that is systemic. And so there is a push to make philanthropy go towards fixing the system, and I think that's very much in line with what Darren Walker, the president of the Ford Foundation, has been talking about. How do we do that? How do we go from philanthropic generosity to justice and systemic change? Payal, can I start with you?
Absolutely, you can. Whether I have the answer or not is another matter. So look, I think the bottom line is systemic change or systems change is really, really hard. And I think I have yet to see it work at scale, which means that there's a huge opportunity for us to work together to figure it out. And I think the key here, again, is collaboration. So how do we, map the life cycle of a challenge and see where all the investments are going and really understand the gap, and then have enough risk appetite to say, this might not work, but it is worth investing in. So to me, the two paths forward for systems change is 1, flexibility, 2, humility, but 3, really thinking through how we collaborate in a way that makes sense, as opposed to it being so fragmented, which is where I think social impact is right now, which is partly why I don't think we see systems change.
So flexibility, humility, collaboration, that's a winning mix right there. Sarah, any thoughts on your end?
Sure, I agree that that's a winning mix. I also had the pleasure to work for Darren early in my career, so I'm so happy to see what he's doing at Ford. at the foundation, I think in addition to those three crucial elements, we're also using our capital to try to address these systemic inequities. So recently we launched something called the Lacuna Fund, which is going to look at biases in algorithms and in machine learning data. And there are biases because of, again, power dynamics. Who has the power to select and curate and label the data that's selected? So this fund that we launched, a $4 million fund with Google.org and IDRC and the German Development Agency, will help to address this by asking for the people in their local communities, researchers, entrepreneurs, and data scientists to propose themselves what data they want to select, curate, and label and move forward through an RFP. So we're starting in sub-Saharan Africa in agriculture and going to move into natural language processing and health after that. And there are, of course, issues in the US too that we may be able to address at some future point as well.
It's really interesting. I mean, there's already 3 stories from both of you on all of the investments that both of your organizations are putting in data and AI for social good, which is it's just such a big need. I mean, if we think of, as you were saying, you know, the talent gap that there is between those who, where, you know, data scientists choose to go, there is the bias issue with, you know, what data that exists tells us about the world today and how do we use that to, you know, project the world of tomorrow. There's a silo issue with the data, and you've given really great examples of, you know, creating partnerships so that we bring all of this data together to make better decisions for social impact. And, you know, really AI and machine learning hold potential for positively impacting the world. And if we don't, you know, if we don't train a diverse set of data scientists and build that capacity and incentivize them to work on those issues, we, you know, we're not going to be doing the whole sector much good. Is there anything else that, any thoughts on this or anything else that you're working on towards that, AI for good, data for good?
I'll start. We held a convening last year with about 40 thought leaders in Bellagio, Italy, where we have a convening center to address this question. And we don't have answers yet, but we do. We recently released a report with 14 perspectives on what we might do to harness AI for good. So all to say that it is a huge opportunity, but also potential challenge. And we're doing a lot of work right now to sort of understand where the opportunity that we might be able to make the most impact on rests, and then to move that forward with partners.
Thank you, Sarah. Payal, I can have another question for you, unless you have
No, that's fine. I'll give you 2 quick examples of what we're doing outside of data.org. So one, which really goes to, you know, how are we trying to use other assets aside from our grant funding, is that we're trying to use our human capital, our expertise. And Mastercard is very rich in data scientists. We have an entire division called Data and Services. So our DNS team does datathons with NGOs, civil society organizations to really help do quick analysis depending on the data sets for 24 hours. It's sort of like a hackathon style, where we really try to dive into the questions and the answers that we think the data can provide. So it's a great example of how we're trying to provide value outside of philanthropic funding. The second thing that we have been doing is Mastercard, by virtue of who we are, which is a network, has a lot of rich data. Of course, it's all aggregated, all anonymized, all GDPR compliant, but there are insights that it can elucidate. So a good example is smart city innovations were the top of mind for a lot of public policymakers at the local level. And there were legitimate questions about the cost benefit of things like free Wi-Fi or bike sharing. So we were able to use Mastercard transaction data, of course, aggregated and anonymized, to actually see what happens to local retail when you introduce free Wi-Fi or when you introduce bike sharing. And what we found is that local retail actually increased compared to neighborhoods where those interventions weren't introduced. And so it's a really important proof point as policymakers are thinking about their pros and cons for any intervention or any regulation, to think about what does this mean in all the different facets and what are all the implications. So 2 just small examples of what we do outside of data.org when it comes to data for good.
Well, that's terrific. Thank you. Definitely a space that we should all watch very closely. So now we're going to shift gear a little bit before we go into the Q&A with our audience. And you are both very impressive ladies. Payal and Sarah, you're in leadership positions in huge organizations. And we want to spend a few minutes getting to know you a little bit more, if that's okay. And a lot of we're getting a lot of questions as well about your career paths and you. But let me start with the question: what challenge keeps you up at night? Sarah, let's start with you.
That's such a great question. I would say right now, what's really concerning to me is whether or not schools are going to open. I'm very concerned about the community spread in the United States in particular, and also other places where there's significant increase, Brazil and India, for example. And school, to me, education is seen these days as a privilege by some, I think, and really it's a right. And unfortunately, because of the challenges in our society, in the US, for example, education, going to school is a place for security, for nutrition, in addition to learning. And the fact that some schools will open and others won't, depending upon the level of virus spread or the resources that a school will have, is just so troubling to me. I recently read an article in the New York Times that was describing a private school in Hawaii that will open because they can afford to have an epidemiologist on staff and some fancy temperature checks. Obviously, private schools have smaller class sizes, which is beneficial in this moment. And that was just shocking and saddening to me.
Right. I mean, the shift of the burden of the risk being put on, our school system and our children really tells us something about where our values are and where we need to do a huge, shift. And I think that, the education, to your point, is just such a driving force for equity and outcomes. And we're just seeing those existing gaps widen even further. Sarah, I know also your parents were educators. So there's been this passion, I think, throughout your career for education. Tell us a bit more about, are you going to be doing more work in that field, and how is your involvement in education today?
Yeah, my mom's on. Hi, Mom. Thanks for inspiring my love of education. I'm not sure if we'll be doing more. I've found a way throughout my career to weave education in. When I was at Rockefeller the first time, I helped to lead an initiative called Digital Jobs Africa that had a significant education and training component. I left Rockefeller to run an organization in New York City called the Fund for Public Schools, which has this awesome opportunity to pair philanthropic capital with the 1.1 million students in New York City, again, most of whom are in need. So I've only been back at the foundation now about 7 months, so give me some time. I think my boss may also be on. Hi, Zia, if you're on. We'll see if I'm able to insert more education work into the work of the innovation team.
Okay, call to action to Sarah's boss. and Payal, you also have a true passion for not just education, but particularly for women and girls, which is actually one of Seoul's 2020 global challenges around learning. What is your personal commitment? What is your story?
So yes, my passion is very much about girls' education and girls' economic empowerment. Unfortunately, I don't think we live in a world right now where adolescent girls have equal access to opportunities in education as their male counterparts. And so from my perspective, it's how do we help unlock those opportunities? How do we build communities that are supportive around these adolescent girls? And how do we make sure that adolescent girls have the role models they need that are their peers and that look like them? And so, one of the things that I would say I'm proudest of in my career is getting to work on girls' education for many years, and really trying to build a movement of collaboration between lots of different companies on this agenda. I led a World Bank group, and I led a girls' education task force among a bunch of private sector companies. And so there's still a lot to do. And I will say that, what keeps me up at night is the fact that since a lot of us are still in lockdown, not only are kids not getting education, girls not getting education, but we're also seeing a rise in things like gender-based violence. And so it almost feels like there's there's this risk that we're sliding back from all the gains we've made. And how we build back better, I think, is going to be incredibly important when it comes to girls' education and their economic empowerment.
That's right. Thank you, Payal, for these reminders. So I'm actually looking at the Q&A coming in, and there are so many good questions that maybe we'll shift to we'll open it up to the audience, bring Abhilasha in as well, and have a conversation all together. Abhilasha, welcome back.
Thanks so much. Great to hear you guys, Sarah and Payal. It was so inspiring and motivating.
And likewise, Abhilasha, I think there are a lot of questions for you. And maybe the first one that I will ask is, I'll start with you, Abhilasha. And it's a question from Alia, who wants to know, how can I get started as a total beginner in social innovation? And lots of times I feel overwhelmed because of lack of time or ability. How can I combat this and start making an impact? Abhilasha, how did you get started?
Okay, so thanks so much, Alia. This is a great question. And the first thing would be to stop feeling disenfranchised, which is very common for younger people, people from more minority communities. For me as a female, definitely it was very overwhelming. And just, give yourself a little more confidence and trust and be at it for a little longer time. I like to give an example of Billie Eilish. She's 17 years old and she's got like 6, Grammys. So if she can create such amazing music at such less age, then definitely you can do. So spend more time, talk to a lot of people. And one thing that you will be surprisingly, you'll be very happy about is that if you reach out to somebody on LinkedIn and just write to them that, hey, I'm trying to do this. This is my background. Can I have a chat with you? Then 20% of the time, at least in my case, people responded. And I had those conversations. And don't be afraid of stupid ideas. My idea was really stupid in the beginning. We were thinking of making air pollution masks, though I would be a millionaire right now if I was doing that. But no, right now we're playing with satellites and AI, and it's so much more fun. And I think we have really got on a very emerging big market. So don't feel so afraid to experiment. You have literally nothing to lose. It's and your fear is a bigger inhibitor than anything else in the world.
I love it. Payal, what about you? What's and maybe an advice that you would have for your 20-year-old self?
Yeah, so I would echo Abhilasha's comments that it's just ask for help. More times than not, you're going to get the help you need. In terms of the advice I would give to my 20-year-old self, and I can imagine a lot of the audience here are probably similar to me. I am very type A. I am very organized. So 20-year-old Payal had, I don't think we really had PowerPoint back then, but I had lists and plans and forecasts of where I was going to go and what I was going to do. And I spent so much time being future oriented and so much time worrying and being anxious that I never really got to enjoy the things I was learning. At 20, I was a junior at Stanford. I was doing Stanford in Washington and Stanford in Buenos Aires, but I was always constantly thinking about, okay, what job am I going to get? And how do I become the most influential Washington Post columnist, which clearly I've not become. So I think the thing is, yes, planning is important, but let's not get too caught up with it. Enjoy the moment, learn while you still have the luxury, and have some faith that things are going to work out the way they need to. So while I'm not a columnist at the Washington Post, I get to do really great stuff in philanthropy every day.
I would say you turned out okay, yes. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Hala.
Sarah, anything from you?
I don't think what I will add is much different from what my colleagues have said. I think being patient is really important. I guess I'll share a personal story. I started my career at the Rockefeller Foundation as a receptionist. As I was entering graduate school, I needed a job that would help me pay for my school. And being the receptionist was awesome. I felt like I won the lottery at that point. I mean, I felt my salary compared to what I was receiving before was awesome. I was working in this amazing institution, and I had no expectations that I would go any further. Instead, what I did is I just took every opportunity that I could to learn. And by doing that, I was able to move up quite unexpectedly again. So I think both taking opportunity, having big goals, but also being really happy to learn and spot opportunity and capitalize on that opportunity. It worked well for me, so I would recommend trying that.
What a compelling story. I mean, from receptionist to managing director at Rockefeller Foundation. Thank you for sharing that. That's lovely. All right, some more technical questions. Maybe a question for Abhilasha from Megan around the carbon cycle that you've been referencing. How can your innovation help us break from that cycle? And specifically, if the dramatic drop in emissions that we saw will only result in an overall drop that is much smaller, what are some of the opportunities we have to make a bigger impact?
Definitely. I'll break it in two parts. One is Blue Sky and one is in general. So at Blue Sky, what we do especially focuses on satellite-based environmental monitoring, and we provide that data to different kinds of people. So let's say Sarah and Payal here are looking at different kinds of investments, and philanthropy is a smaller part. When you go to public market bonds, that's a much bigger pie, and that capital is still going into coal. It is still going into thermal power plants. It is still going into a lot of assets which have high carbon impact. And our role is to match this data to the people who are moving capital in these places and be like, hey, don't invest in that. And that's where I hope we will be able to break this carbon cycle. The second part is that I'm personally super committed. I'm turning 30 tomorrow, so I'm committed at literally working on climate change for the next 10, 20 years of my life. And one thing is that when you get started on it and you start to etch at a problem slowly, you're actually able to get somewhere. So, I started my career with solar industry, and look where it's come. Back in 2010, we were still trying to make solar cells, and we were still trying to work on their efficiency. And I was working nanotechnology, and back into 2018, I was investing $25 million in solar power projects. So in the next 10 years, if we are really committed, we will be able to find many more opportunities, and I will be actually coming with more ideas and more things to change climate, change this world of climate risk.
Fantastic. And actually a follow-up question, if that's okay. Obviously a lot of your work is based on data. How do you make sure that organizations feel safe and protected and even incentivized to share that kind of information?
Mostly we don't actually take a lot of information from different organizations. We're still working on the model of satellite and ground monitoring data, which is either publicly available or it's done through partnerships, which are, we also do not deal a lot with human data. It's mostly data about the planet. So whether it's water quality and soil quality, which I think people are more happy to share. And then how do we get it into hands of the people is that we moved into a very simple API models. In the last 5 years, great API businesses have been built, and it's very easy to integrate an API across the world. So it's almost like a pipeline. And instead of flowing oil through that pipeline, you're flowing data. And I could give that API to a student for, let's say, $20 a month, and I can give it to Mastercard for probably $2 million a month. But you can keep on selling that same API, different features, different resolution, and moving away from the dashboard or the app model to just data set on which people can build and play and make their models and decisions. I think that's been a very key thing for us to democratize this information.
Fantastic, thank you. And that question was from Mehmet. So Mehmet, thank you for your question. So there are actually a lot of questions on data.org on how people can get involved in that effort, particularly if they're scientists. Sarah or Payal, any one of you want to take this on?
I'll start. There are a few different ways. We recently released an RFP, so there are opportunities that we will actually put out into the world. That one closed, but I'm sure more will be coming. Another way is the foundation has a partner called DataKind, and DataKind's amazing. They basically bring together a volunteer community to work to solve challenges in sometimes short and sometimes long sprints. I'll give just one brief example. Recently, there was a city in the US that was looking to access CARES funding as a result of the pandemic, and a team at DataKind was able to quickly put together a heat map that enabled them to track where there were foreclosures, which was going to be a key indicator for where to allocate this funding. I think they turned it around, I can't remember, in 2 to 3 days. And it was actually a crucial tool in helping that city to unlock this funding and to direct it to the communities that needed it. And the people, I don't know their names, but the people that were working on that were that data kind volunteer force. So I think there are both direct ways through the organization that you're working with and also personal ways if you want to use volunteer time.
That's terrific. So another call to action. Actually, we have a comment from Isaac, and we've been talking about young people, being part of social change. And Isaac is saying, how about those who are over 30? Some older folks have innovative ideas that could be helpful to society, and especially the vulnerable. Any examples from the work that you've done, or people that you've worked with that have addressed specifically that, or who are over 50 themselves?
Would you like me to start?
Yes, please.
Oh, sure. I don't have any specific examples. I feel that people of all ages can get involved. I mean, it's awesome to see. Abhilasha was working on solar energy at 20. Is that if you were doing it 10 years ago? I mean, that's amazing. Congratulations and happy birthday. But yeah, I think that anybody can get involved at any time in your career. And there are amazing programs if you're looking to switch careers, for example, from for-profit to nonprofit, that can help you do that. For example, there's a program that the Robin Hood Foundation runs in New York City that helps to train career switchers. So I would look into those.
And it's like, I hope I took note of that. So that's great. Thank you for the tip. And of course, we all bring such a unique perspective to the challenges that we see, right? I mean, we're always talking about how can those who are closest to the problem are those that are best placed to solve it. And that's what Solve believes in actually as an organization. And so we want to make sure that anyone, anywhere can take part in this. And it's only if we bring everyone to the problem solving table that we can actually make a dent in those global challenges. So thank you for your question, and I really hope you stay engaged with the social issues that you're seeing and that you care about. Payal, a question from Reha. What is the sweet spot of size and stage of businesses that you support and invest in? Do you do grants in addition to impact investing? Tell us more about the portfolio of work that you do.
Yeah, so we are focused on grant making and partnerships with nonprofits. In terms of kind of the sweet spot in the segmentation, we have been working on a hypothesis that there's a small segment of small, micro and small businesses that aren't the survivalist small businesses, and they're not the really medium-sized ones. They're somewhere between micro and small. We're calling them strivers. We're saying that they're between 2 and 10 employees. And what their defining characteristic is that they have a propensity and a desire to grow. So we have been piloting a number of different program models that tries to actually whittle down our program participants so that we get to a pool of strivers where then we will go really high touch, high intensity, high intervention, because our hypothesis is that if we're able to identify strivers, that's where our greatest return on social impact is going to be. So again, it's not the one-man band and it's not the 50-person organization. It's this, we're kind of thinking it's almost a manifestation of the missing middle. But before they can get to the missing middle, they're the missing micro. And so that's the segmentation that we're really focused on investing in from a philanthropic perspective.
Well, thank you for this. And I think we are actually getting close to time. So this was our last question. I want to thank you, Abhilasha, Payal, and Sarah so much for joining me for Solving from Anywhere today. This was such a terrific conversation. I really, really appreciate your time. So if we want to solve humanity's biggest challenges, we need to close the gap in innovation. I hope you got up to date a lot of concrete stories about how we're doing that, whether you're a social entrepreneur or whether you're a big philanthropic organization, and also of the partnerships that help scale that kind of work. We talked about the flexibility, humility, collaboration that it takes to do this work and do it better. We talked about taking risk, about managing change, about adapting to this moment, whether it's in relation to the relationship between funders and grantees and and rethinking that relationship of power, dialing up flexibility, building capacity for each other. This was really just such a rich conversation with very concrete calls to action. So if you're a donor, think about flexibility, about working together if we want to create systemic change. Innovators, if you're an innovator, ask for help, let go of the plan, let go of the list, and of course, most importantly, learn. If you're an academic, you're a data scientist, your help is so needed right now. And with all the work, and if you're over 50 as well, I think there's just been such such great insights here and real tips for getting engaged more in social impact. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. If you were impressed with Abhilasha's work and interested in supporting more social entrepreneurs like her, please let us know. We would love to hear from you. And of course, I can't leave you before telling you that we'd love to have you back in 2 weeks for the next Solving from Anywhere on August 4th, where we'll be speaking with Gwyneth Paul, the Senior Director in Strategic Partnerships and Community Impact at Comcast, NBC Universal, and Shalu Garg, who runs Microsoft for Startups. In the meantime, please take a few moments to fill out the survey because we want to hear from you and how you thought of what you thought of this conversation. Thanks again for our speakers. Thank you for joining, and happy solving.